From almost defeating the Dagestani in their last encounter, to the crazy improvement in his game after his fight with El Pantera, here's the real reason Alexander Volkanovski is going to dethrone Islam Makhachev. It might sound crazy seeing how Makhachev's already put Volk in his place, but most people, including the featherweight champ, agree that the win's only good on paper, cause Alex came this close to beating Makhachev. In fact, some fans say that he did defeat the Dagestani machine, but the judges scored it wrong, and it makes sense if you take a closer look at the fight. Sure, Islam put on an impressive wrestling show, but Volk squeezed his way out of every tight spot without slowing down for a single second. So either the great was too good for Makhachev, or the Dagestani machine lost his grappling magic. Still, nothing can change the fact that Volk was Islam's toughest opponent yet. And that's huge considering he wasn't even a part of the same weight class, cause Alex had to bulk up to lightweight for the single bout, and he still gave a stellar performance that night. Even if Islam's fans can't give the win to Volk, they'd all have to agree that it was the closest contest anyone's ever seen. And it could have easily been the Aussie's victory if he'd done a few things to bridge the score gap. And he isn't ashamed of putting it out in the open for all of us, because the great admits he underestimated Islam's striking skills. I know you're confused because the Dagestanis aren't well known for their stand-up game. And while they're beasts on the mat, they can't throw mean punches like other power hitters in the UFC. That's exactly why Volk wasn't prepared for some A-class striking from the Dagestani. And you can bet he was surprised when Makhachev made him stumble in just the first round. I would have called it a lucky punch, but I can't, because trust me when I say that Makhachev was no different in the second round. Volk went for a body shot when he was already too far from Islam. And that was a big mistake, because Makhachev dodged it with ease and went straight for a left counter that stunned Volk. It connected on the Aussie's jaw so hard that he wobbled halfway back, but he deserves some credit here as well, because no one else would have stayed up after a Superman punch like that. But Islam's best and final strike came in the fifth round, and even though that was by far the worst round for him, he can at least say that he bruised Alexander the Great. That's right, you might have seen a bandage on Alex's face after the fight, and that'll always be a spoil of war for the Dagestani machine. But Islam's nuts if he thinks he can land even one good strike on Volk again, because with a fight IQ like the Aussies, he's already figured out a solution to Islam's striking game. Volk believes the Dagestani has the potential to knock anyone out, but his punches can give you a bandage at best right now, and he's only got himself to blame for it. The Aussie was full of praise for Islam's fight IQ as well, and he said that the Dagestani's got a good eye, or in other words, Islam can figure out his next move in advance and take advantage of his surroundings by paying attention to every single detail all at once. But unfortunately, planning's all he can do, because to carry out the plan, he needs his feet to work as well as his mind. And that's an area where Islam could use a lot of improvement. Volk believes that his body can't catch up with his mind, and that's why he can see the cracks in defenses and know the right moment to attack. But even if he does land those strikes, they don't pack as much power as they should, only because of his lacking footwork. And as long as Islam keeps that up, it's only going to frustrate him even more, because he'd never get the result he expected, and the Aussie would be safer than ever from any real damage. So it's still a win-win for Volk when it comes to striking. But Volk boldly claimed that Islam underestimated his wrestling skills, and I know Islam's one of the best wrestlers on the whole roster, but he did take the Aussie lightly, and he had every reason to do so, because he was taller, heavier, and more experienced than Volk. So it was no surprise when I saw him toy around with the great. But he wasn't as successful as I thought he'd be, because Makhachev had the chance to sneak in a choke from the back in the first round, but while he was trying to do that, Volk was grinning with the Dagestani's hands on his neck. Alex was simply waiting for the bell, and that's how easily he escaped the first near submission attempt. Not to mention, Volk always made it back to his feet after Makhachev's takedowns, and that's probably why only 4 out of 9 of his takedown attempts were scored in his favor. That's very unusual for the Dagestani machine, whose main specialty is ground game and grappling. Though he did give us a good show in the 4th round when he scored a beautiful takedown over the Aussie and locked him in a body triangle. Of course, he was in control of the whole round from that point onward, but he couldn't trap Volk enough to make him tap out. And even though the Aussie had been struggling with the submission for 3 whole minutes, he somehow mustered the strength to throw blind punches over his head, and luckily, all of them connected with Makhachev's face. So even in a completely trapped situation, Volk easily survived 3 whole minutes while fighting back at the same time. You could even say the Aussies solved the puzzle of Dagestani wrestling, and a lot of people want to know that secret. We can all agree that the words Dagestani and wrestling just fit together, because the best wrestlers in the history of UFC hail from Dagestan, Russia. Even the biggest names in the promotion like Khabib, Ankalaev, and Makhachev himself have destroyed rosters with their ground game. No one's been able to figure out a solution to this because just like Khabib, his students are world-class grapplers who score more than 5 takedowns on average. The only guy who came close to lasting against the Dagestanis is Volk himself. And how'd he do that? It's simple. He trained his ass off so he'd turn into a monster that never runs out of fuel. It's no secret that Volk's got the best cardio game in the whole promotion, and the Aussies literally got a gas tank, which has led him through multiple 5-round wars. But it doesn't just help him out with the stamina, it's also got a lot to do with endurance, because when a 5'10" Russian is trying to choke you or slam you to the ground, your best hope of surviving the torture is to have an energy reserve at all times. This was also the case with Volk because no matter what Islam did, Volk would just get right back up and hit him harder. Just look at the final round of their fight, which all 3 judges scored in favor of the Aussie because even though he should have been gasping for air after 4 rounds of torture, Volk was all fired up as he dropped Islam with a hard right and went nuts on the ground, pounding him for 1 minute straight, which probably would have led to a TKO victory if the bell hadn't rung when it did. So from the looks of it, the fight was all Volkanovski toward the end, and when the judges gave Islam a lead of 5 points over the Aussie, everyone thought he'd be down in the dumps and he wouldn't have his mind in the game. They weren't all wrong, but they were definitely not right either, because Volk just blasted through his next opponent at UFC 290, and that's proof enough that Volk's ready for a rematch more than ever, even though Alex's next match was set with Yair Rodriguez. After UFC 284, he was mostly still focused on his loss to Makhachev. Volk was looking like a maniac who was obsessed with the first loss of his UFC career, and many fans thought he'd have no time to prepare for El Pantera, but Volk proved all of them wrong. He humiliated El Pantera so bad, he spent half the fight on the ground and scored 7 takedowns in under 3 rounds, and the other half blasting his head off with those powerful strikes, until Volk finally took mercy and ended the fight with a 3rd-round KO. From the looks of it, Volk's in even better shape than he was last time, because he already had the upper hand in striking, and now his wrestling skills have improved even more. Islam better step up his game because Volk's coming, and he's coming harder than ever. So, from the crazy improvement in his game after his fight with El Pantera to him almost defeating the Dagestani in their last encounter, that's the real reason Alexander Volkanovski is going to dethrone Islam Makhachev.